Thank you. So let's take a walk down memory lane. Who was alive in 1972 here? Awesome. Just a little quiz. What happened in 1972? Anybody know anything? The Olympics, the Munich Olympics. The Lions were 8-5-1. Watergate, Vietnam. So I remember that because that was the year that I took my first drink, and I was 12. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in my parents' basement with my brother Mike. He was actually a rock and roll singer, pretty boy. And I remember three things about my parents' basement that were pretty cool. One was the gaudy orange upholstery. The second, pool table. And the third being my parents' bar. So that day, my brother pulled out a pint of brandy and handed it to me and said, "Take a drink. It's great." I took a drink of that, and of course I gagged when I drank it. But I remember two things about that when that hit me. First of all, when it hit my stomach and hit my brain, I noticed that I felt calm for the first time since I could remember. See, it was kind of a tough time for me in my life because I was awkward, I was introverted, I was shy, I lacked basically self-esteem. I had a nose too big for my face, had a lot of acne issues, and the other kids bullied me. So I had a lot of that. I was tossed around more than once. So from that time forward, alcohol became one of my companions. It accompanied me to school dances in high school. It accompanied me where I went, into dingy bars as a teenager, and all through my life. So what I want to talk to you today about is three lessons or three key concepts that can change your life if employed properly. And the first being, who do you want to be? So I'd ask all of you a rhetorical question. Basically, who do you want to be? What's your aspirations in life? Got to think about basically where you want to go to. So let me give you an illustration about my life. On January 5th, 2002, I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning and turned over and realized that my bed was wet and it was not water. Didn't remember much from last night because I had yet another blackout. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and the usual handsome dude you see here wasn't there. Kind of a frightening sight. I had a big bruise on my forehead. My eyes were vacant looking. I didn't remember falling. Didn't remember anything the night before. And I heard a voice in my whisper in my ear, "Stop drinking." And that kind of shook me up because I had tried off and on through my life to stop unsuccessfully. And actually since the age of 12, except for brief stints, I had never stopped. So I decided to get the advice of the then girlfriend I had. Her name was Barb. So I said to her, I said, "I think I'm going to stop drinking." She said, "You're not an alcoholic. You don't have a problem drinking. And besides, I like it when you drink. You're fun when you drink." So the advice wasn't what I expected, but nonetheless, I decided to think it through. So later that day, I decided that I needed to come up with an action plan. So an action plan basically is the basis by which the resilience you need to act on your aspirations. I came up with the action plan that I would go to the hospital that day and I would check myself in to get help. So I walked to the hospital, a long hour walk in the dark, cold. It's a January night. And I walked up and said the most important words I've ever said in my life. I said, "I have a drinking problem and I can't stop. I need help." So ironically, they admitted me to a psychiatric unit. Actually, I was in the emergency room, a psychiatric bed. So it was a gurney, glass doors, curtains, and a camera to watch my actions. And all that night, I thought about how I'd gotten to that point. And I also started to doubt my decision. I thought about how the drinking had gotten out of control over the last couple of years, actually, especially the last 6 months. A DUI, threatening to destroy my life, end my life, worse, try to harm somebody else. And by that night, later that night, the DT started. And what I wanted to do was get up and sign myself out against medical advice. But the voice that I heard early that day became more clear. I heard it then was stop drinking or die. And that helped me to find the resilience to see that through. So the third part of the third steps that I used was accepting who you are. So in rehab, I had this counselor. His name was Bill, drug and alcohol counselor. And he wore a cowboy hat, cowboy boots, smoked a pipe. I didn't like him. During our sessions, which was almost every day, he kept confronting me about the fact that I was overthinking. He was kind of a dogmatic 12-stepper, so he kept saying, you need to trust the program. And I wanted to keep getting inside my head. But on a day, last Friday in 2002 in January, I was stoked. I was happy to see him. Because I graduated from rehab. I finally had that coin that said, I know I was going home. So that day he pushed a piece of paper to me. And I looked and said, alcoholism? Yeah, that makes sense. Family history of alcoholism? Brother, parents, grandfather? Summary, prognosis. Prognosis, 10% chance of long-term sobriety. I did the reasonable thing. I thanked him and shook his hand and left rehab that day. I was actually quite annoyed, but nonetheless. So 2 months later, I decided to go back to the scene of the crime. That was one of my favorite bars. His name was Mickey's, actually, where on many Wednesday nights I would sing late into the night, dreaming of leaving my day job as a singer. It's supposed to be a joke. But okay. So I walked in that day, and before I could sit down, John, the regular bartender, had slung a bottle of Coors Light under me, right in front of me. And I remember sitting there looking at that bottle of Coors Light. And it was like every aspect of my being wanted to drink that. And all I could think of was 10%. So I pushed it aside and I asked for a Diet Coke. And what I realized is that Bill had given me quite a gift. He had given me the gift, basically, of a challenge. So one question I have for all of you is, what do you do when you're underestimated? What does that mean to say you don't have much of a chance? Everybody's encountered that in your life somewhere. 10% chance of graduating, 10% chance of achieving something. So I had to figure out what to do with that. And I decided that was the gift I needed, because the glass was not 90% empty, it was 10% full. So that day I sat there for a long minutes and thought about how the steps I'd used, which is, who do I want to be? That I made that choice to change my life that day. But I realized that choice had to be made every day. It can't just be a one-time occurrence. It had to be constantly reasserted. And the action plan, I would be I would be facing issues of maintaining sobriety all my life. And I had to realize that the strength and the resilience to stay sober had to come from within. So again, the voice that visited me that day was ever present. And then the last part is accepting who you are. I realized that that meant that, life's about a series of chapters. And some chapters better than others. But life basically can get better. And I realized that I had to surround myself with a more healthy element. I had to stop associating with people that drank, for example. So I had to change every aspect of who I was. And that lesson and that process actually was to be one of the biggest lessons of my life. So about a year and a half ago, I got offered a position here at Central, full professor, tenured division director. And it was the culmination of more than 15 years of hard work, research, publication, administration, teaching, basically everything I dreamed of. I bought a home on a beautiful lake nearby here, and I had the American dream. But there was something missing for me. You see, the story I'm telling you, I had not told anybody hardly at all, except for my family and a few close friends. I was ashamed of that story. I was afraid to tell it. But something was whispering to me that I needed to talk about it. I needed to be able to share it. So I did what I had to do, which was I had to examine how to get there. Now, I've been a higher education educator for 25 plus years. So comfortable in the classroom, used to being up there teaching content. But to stand in front of a group of people and strangers and talk about my darkest secrets, no, that's a little tougher. So I decided I needed to discover, and so the steps were, an action plan. I hired a professional speaker to be my coach. And I wrote a book last year that I published on Amazon called Labyrinth, which basically chronicled my life. Other things that I'm not talking about here. And so I went to work, practicing, refining the story. And what I realized was accepting who I am meant that I had to share it. So that kind of was the aha moment for me. So to you, what have you learned from my story? So what I would challenge you to think about is, wherever you are in life, is who do you want to be? It's always going to be a process of change. It's always going to be a process of evolution. You're never going to arrive at the place that you want to be. You have to continue to strive. There is nothing stopping any of you from striving to your dreams. And do you have an action plan? Meaning, do you have the resilience? That's kind of the undefined element that will drive you to succeed. And realize that every day, the struggle. You'll always be up against struggles. And that will be the strength that will push you through. But most importantly, though, accepting who you are means that embracing the chapters of your life and realizing that things will only get better with every step forward. And trust me when I say that any of you, whatever challenges you have the resilience to achieve those challenges. So what I'm hoping that you will do, if you would, is I have a form to fill out. If you want to give me a few thoughts about the message that I'm giving, I'd be greatly appreciated. That's my story. And I want to thank you for allowing me to come in and tell it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.